Well, we're going to do the book of Ecclesiastes. I haven't done this one for a little bit. I really like the book of Ecclesiastes. Other people are not so excited about the book of Ecclesiastes. One of the interesting things I think about the book is that of all the books in the Bible, I read a lot of the books that scholars write about these things because that's what pastors do. There's the greatest disagreement probably around Ecclesiastes about what is the nature of the book? What is the book actually saying? There are some pretty polarized opposites of how people see this particular book. So the way I'm going to try to do this is not to tell you what it means, but instead give everyone a chance to talk about what they hear in this book, saying there is a lot of diversity in how people respond to what's in the book of Ecclesiastes. And when everybody else has gone over it, maybe I'll give you something of what I think about it, but I don't want to, too much influence what people hear in this study to begin with. Ecclesiastes is part of what we call the wisdom tradition in the Old Testament. Most of what we find in the Bible is much more statement of God, how God reveals God's self in the world. So first 5 books of the Bible are really about God revealing God's self in the Exodus event and the coming together of the people of Israel, that in these events, God is actually revealing who God is. In the prophets, God reveals God's self through the words of the prophet. In the wisdom tradition, what we have is people much more observing the world around them and saying, where do we see God? And how do we see God acting in the world around us? Kind of what we're doing for stewardship this year. And they come to very different understandings of what reality really says about the person of God. And Ecclesiastes is within that tradition, along with Proverbs and Song of Songs. To a certain extent, the Psalms are what we call the wisdom tradition within the Old Testament. So with that, what I'll do is read a little section and I'll ask you kind of to think about, so what does that say to you? And sometimes I'll give you a few kind of language notes so you know that something about the words in Hebrew. So really the first couple of verses in Ecclesiastes are an introduction to the whole thing. So we have the words of the teacher. Now, the word teacher there is a translation of a Hebrew word that has much more of an understanding. The word is koala, much more the understanding of a leader of an assembly, somebody who draws an assembly together. People who translate that word teacher do so because what we have is a series of teachings here. So they kind of say, well, the person who's doing this is a teacher, and that's the assembly they're drawing together. But it can be lots of things. The kings would assemble the people for various celebrations within the Jewish tradition. You could have a leader, a political leader could be, an assembler. But the word actually has the sense of one who assembles a group. So, and then it goes on, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities. And vanity here, the actual Hebrew word is vapor or smoke. So, vapor of vapors, says the teacher. Vapor of vapors or vanity of vanities. All is vanity. So, you've just read the introduction to this book. What do you think? Is this a book you're going to go, yeah, this one's for me?
My Bible says meaningless.
That can also, it's all, that Hebrew word has a number of different senses it can have. It can have, useless, can be a concept, ephemeral. It's all passing away all the time. So just like you try to grab hold of smoke and it just disappears, there's this ephemeral nature to it, a passing reality. All these things can be a part of what you're talking about when you use that Hebrew word. We often hear it translated vanity. I'm not sure vanity is the best translation.
Mhm.
We might have, if I think it comes because people want something more solid. I think probably if I was translating it would just be vapor. Vapor of vapors, all is vapor. So that it actually carries with it all those meanings. That it's this kind of ephemeral, unwieldy sort of reality. And the author's saying that's what reality is. Everything is this kind of...
Can't nail it down.
Right.
I have one question, a little more. That beginning, the words of the preacher, comma, the son of David. So this writer wasn't Jewish, he was Greek, wasn't he? That's what it says in my...
Well, some people have traced a lot of the thinking in it to the Greek time period.
Mhm.
In contrast to people who want to take the text very literally, they will argue that what this is written by Solomon. So David's son, Solomon, is the one who wrote this particular letter, or this particular book. There are some problems with that, first of all. And the other reason Solomon gets kind of linked up with this is it's wisdom literature. It's kind of and Solomon's kind of the symbol of wisdom par excellence. The problem is that a lot of the language and thinking patterns that are in here don't match that time period. They actually match a time period very much later. Most of the people I've read place it more in the time between the Babylonian exile and when the Greek culture kind of invaded Judaism. So we're in that kind of window in between those two things is where Ecclesiastes takes place. So there may be Greek influences to the work, but it's purely, it's very much a Hebrew. In fact, there's probably lots of influences on the work, Sumerian and Egyptian, Greek, because we can find similar phrasing in all those cultures to what we find in Ecclesiastes. But certainly I would say that it's probably a Jewish writer, and it's probably not Solomon. Or either of any of David's sons, because it just doesn't seem to, be tied to that particular time period. But you all can kind of search that up for yourself. So then we really get into, in the next section, which will run up to verse 11, why is everything kind of vanity of vanities, or vapor of vapors? The writer says, what do people gain from all the toil at which they toil under the sun? Generation goes, and generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hurries to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes round to the north. Round and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run down to the sea, but the sea is not full, to the place where the streams flow, and they continue to flow. All things are wearisome, more than one can express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It's already been in the ages before us. The people of long ago are not remembered, nor will there be any remembrance of people yet to come by those who come after them.
It's a downer.
Yeah.
So what do you hear in all that?
We are very insignificant.
Okay, there's an insignificance of humanity in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
The circle of life.
Yep, things just kind of go around in a circle.
Yep.
Come, go, come, go.
Which is true. It's true.
It's true. Yeah, there's
It is.
nothing in there that's not true.
Okay.
Which means we need to enjoy each day as much as we can.
Okay.
Make the most of it.
Mhm.
Why?
Good question.
Why bother? I mean, according to him or her.
Let's see. So the next part then runs down from 12 to 16. I, the teacher, when king over Israel and Jerusalem, applied my mind to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Actually, this runs to the end of chapter 2, so we'll take that whole section together. It is an unhappy business that God has given to human beings to be busy with. I saw the deeds that are done under the sun, and see, all is vapor and a chasing after wind. But if crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a chasing after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and those who increase knowledge increase sorrow. I said to myself, come now, I will make a test of pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But again, this is also vapor. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my mind how to cheer my body with wine, my mind still guiding me with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly until I might see what was good for mortals to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings in the provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and delights of the flesh and many concubines. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also, my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had spent in doing it. And again, all was vapor and a chasing after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly, for what can the one do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. And I saw that wisdom excels folly as light excels darkness. The wise have eyes in their head, but fools walk in the darkness. Yet I perceive that the same fate befalls all of them. Then I said to myself, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said to myself, this also is vapor. For there's no enduring remembrance of the wise or of fools, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How can the wise die just like fools? So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vapor and a chasing after wind. I hated all my toil in which I had toiled under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to those who come after me. And who knows whether they will be wise or foolish? Yet they will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vapor. So I turned and gave my heart to a despair concerning all the toil, my labors under the sun, because sometimes one who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave all to be enjoyed by another who did not toil for it. This also is vapor and a great evil. What do mortals get from all the toil and strain which they toil under the sun. For all their days are full of pain, and their work is vexation. Even at night their minds do not rest. This also is vapor. There's nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from God, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases God, God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner, God gives the work of gathering and heaping only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vapor and a chasing after wind.
This makes me think it's not too far off from Buddhism. I've done a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And it's like, whatever happens, happens. So be it, whatever. I'm sure you've read about Buddhism.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like, okay,
I love Thich Nhat Hanh. I think he's
one of my past ministers, actually, when she left our church, she secretly told me she was flipping to Buddhism, and she said, "Don't tell anybody." And I'm like, "Well, okay, but I read a lot in my spiritual search over the years, and I can see. Well, I don't know exactly where in the time period Buddhism came along, but was that during this time or?
Buddhism is even more ancient than Christianity, or Judaism and Buddhism might be around the same period of time.
So that's why this is a little bit of grading with the faith. Buddhism is more about the experience, right? Yeah, but it's interesting that trying to let go of things and.
Okay.
I don't know. It's not an easy concept. Kind of.
I like the end part, starting in 24, where he finally brings God in a little bit more than what he has. There's nothing better for man that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God.
Okay.
So looking at it from an author, I hear this first two chapters is more of he's gaining his audience.
Sure.
Like, oh, I do that. Yeah, I can see that. So kind of draw them in. And then what is the point to this? Why am I drawing you in? Why do I want you to read this part of the Bible? Now we're going to get into it because we are sinners and God's in charge. And what doesn't change is God. And I think they said in the beginning, earth remains forever. That doesn't mean that it doesn't change or have an impact, but that's it's a constant. I think that's a good term to use. Earth is a constant, and so is God. So I think it's just drawing the author in that you can identify with it.
Or draw the reader in.
Right, reader. Yeah. Yes.
Any other thoughts?
I don't think working, he seems to talk about toil, but that's what we do. We build a house, we form families, that's part of the human nature. So it isn't unhappy, it's just toil. I don't know.
I think one of the questions, though, that's behind all this is, for what do you toil?
The big bucks.
Okay. And the writer of this says, I did that. I acquired as money as you could get. I worked for it. You know what? I'm still going to die. I'm still going to have to give it away to someone else. And I'm not even sure who's going to get it. So there's this sense of, so what's the point? Why am I acquiring all this money when I'm just going to die? What's the point? Why am I doing this? So in that sense, that's the way he's talking about why the toil of it all seems so useless. If my toil led to something that was going to change the reality around me or be remembered forever or somehow establish some kind of ongoing existence, whether that's in the minds of other people or my own existence or whatever, that'd be fine. But all I'm doing is doing this so it can all end. What is the point?
What about using your God-given talent and gifts that he gave you?
Okay. What about it? And
Having a purposeful life?
Well, we eradicated polio from toil. We established the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, through the toil of building dynamite. But there are things that last. I think this writer is just in a funk at this.
Some people have
particular
actually
time.
said that this person's just depressive. Can't see. But I think, again, just to put it in some kind of perspective so you can kind of get a sense of what the person's trying to drive home. You're right. We have done things like got rid of polio. The author would say, though, and then came COVID. And then came some other disease. And then say, so yeah, we have this endless cycle of we fix a disease, a new disease arises and causes us just as much problem as the disease that went before. And that even there's a peace prize now and we encourage peace. And there's been groups that have probably from the beginning of time encouraged it, but there are still wars. They still get fought all the time. You can strive for peace, but there's always going to be war. It's this, for the author, there's a sense of an endless round that so I could fix something for a time. So I can build a beautiful house that will fall down in 100 years. I could get a stack of money that will be gone, within so much time. I can acquire all kinds of wisdom. One of the things that, at least the author's saying is that along with wisdom also comes now all the problems too. So now you're vexed and upset about the fact that now that I have all this wisdom, I also know all the things that I really didn't want to know.
Right.
So what's the point of that? And what am I going to do with the wisdom? And if we look at, the universal shape of things, what was wisdom 500 years ago, today has been supplanted by all the new wisdom that comes along. So you think you got it all, down to a little bubble, but somehow that all gets blown away anyway. So the person's saying, all these things they're all passing. They're all ephemeral. They're all, in and of themselves, useless.
All those things are good and they help us, but it's almost like it has to be simpler than that, like our connection to each other and to God, something just basic. All these other things help civilization, but let's even getting at that.
Let's go to the next chapter, and maybe there's some hope there. Some people say yes, some people say no. You get to decide for yourself what the author is trying to get at. So at the beginning of chapter 3, we get, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. Time to be born and a time to die. Time to plant and a time to plant up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, time to throw away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, a time to speak, time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. What gain have the workers from their toil? I have seen the business that God has given to everyone to be busy with. He has made everything suitable for its time. Moreover, he has put a sense of past and future into their minds, yet they cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that there is nothing better for them than to be happy and enjoy themselves as long as they live. Moreover, it is God's gift that all should eat and drink and take pleasure in all their toil. I know that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done this so that all should stand in awe before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already is, and God seeks out what has gone by.
This is a little gentler than that the day of reckoning for an Old Testament chapter, isn't it? Yeah, gentler.
This is part of a hippie song. Turn, turn,
Yeah, to everything, turn.
Sung at a lot of weddings when I.
There is a season. Turn, turn. Yeah, the birds.
Yes.
Yep, this is where they got the song.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, he's bringing God into it more now from 10 on. It makes it a little better.
Yep, kumbaya.
That's a good message or what?
Kumbaya. Someone's praying, my love. Kumbaya. Yep.
Come by here, is it?
No, God be with me, I think, or something.
is it?
Yeah, or God be with us, or. So, so what do you do with this segment?
Memorize it.
Sing with the birds.
This has been a turning point year for me because I have been told by 2 doctors I can no longer garden. And it hits me home because I really went through a grieving process because I grew up on a farm, and the seasons for me is getting out, like, being with the animals. I did get 10 butterflies this year, by the way. I usually get 6. But it's comforting to me to be in nature and to do things with it and be creative. And now I have to kind of let it go. And I was told by several people to start loving my weeds, which I am a little bit, but it's a process. My daughter came and helped me downsize things. And, but I can see I'm letting go.
Yeah.
And it's time. I was going to say it's a time. It's a time to let that go, and then just enjoy the natural.
Okay.
And but this is resonant. That's why the Bible's so cool. When as you go through years of life, you get it at different levels. And
Yeah, we always bring ourselves. To
sure,
reading
yes,
the Bible.
right. So this is a nice message. There is a time for everything, and the silent and time to speak. I'm an extrovert, and my mother was. And then as my parents got older, I noticed that she got quiet. And when she died, I finally had an opportunity to talk to my dad for 3 years. So, but the quietness of older people sometimes, because it's kind of a dichotomy for me, because then you think I would like to see more wisdom coming from the older, but they quiet down. But that's wisdom too, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's very interesting. It's wordsmithy stuff for your writer. You writer too? Oh, sound like one. Yeah.
Maybe we should think about, this sounds like repetitive. Maybe we should think, what if the world were created with chaos? How would we react? But this, we know how to toil. We have wisdom. We have laughter, food.
Give structure.
But if it were pure chaos, maybe we wouldn't have time for God. I don't know.
Or take the time to notice.
Yeah.
Take the time to.
Yeah. So maybe we need what?
The basic things in life.
And repeating, the wind.
Rinse,
And
repeat.
the wind, look at us. On the top, in the north, the wind blows from west to east. Down below, it blows from east to west. Is that important? I don't know.
Thoughts from over here. Thoughts from over here.
Just take it all in.
I like this book.
Seems like it's getting more to the basic things of life. We have to work, but we can enjoy it. We need each other, either a small group or a community. We need to eat. Doesn't have to be big, elaborate meals. It can be rice and beans. And God's always there, even if we don't know or believe.
Notice.
We notice, right?
This is one place where I will give you a little bit of how I have thought about this book over the years. I started out, the first time I read Ecclesiastes, it was pretty depressing, I thought. Not from the perspective, I agree with Jackie that the order is something we kind of like as people. We would hate it if gravity suddenly stopped working and we all floated away, or if the basic structure of the world didn't function on some level that that was consistent, that we could understand. But it is, and as we go further in the book, he'll get into some of those, though he's already touched on it. What is less kind and acceptable to us is that some things of human reality don't change. So we would love to see that our efforts brought about a more peaceful, caring world. But it doesn't seem to, you throw those efforts at the world and it's like, it just goes on, broken, and people killing each other all the time. What's the point then if we're not going to learn ever to care for each other more? What's the point of if we work to feed the hungry, but the hungry keep coming and there's no real change to this reality? I think at that level is the greater frustration for those who are, and I think as this writer goes on, they'll express that. The real frustration isn't that the natural world kind of goes in this cycle, though, that's just a symbol of the reality, but that this other part of the world never changes. It never, everything we do, it's what's gone on before. And, so we're throwing ourselves into this stuff and it doesn't seem to alter the course of things. The other piece of it for this particular writer is, and we've, again, I think gotten somewhat of a hint of it in these first few chapters, is that they're deeply in tune with the reality within Hebrew thinking that everything comes from God. So God is the originator, the one who gives all the gifts. But God doesn't seem to do it in any reasonable sort of way. People who shouldn't get the gifts get them.
Yeah.
People who should get the gifts don't get them. There's a sense in which the author says, what is God doing? We do not understand, which is in contrast to books like the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs says, if you do this, then this good thing will follow. There's kind of this connection between your actions in reality create this particular connection with God. So people who are generous, God will be generous to. People who are wise, God will use that wisdom to make their lives better. These things are all, and it's also what you find in the book of Deuteronomy, which really has the concept of good is rewarded, bad is punished. That's the way the world works. Now, Ecclesiastes, along with Job and a few other books, said, no, that's not the way the world works. Things are much more random than that. And we don't get the randomness of all this. But for me, then, he then enters into some focus in chapter 3 about what is a possibility of how to face all this. And part of it comes from my knowledge that within Greek thinking later on, what you will get is two kinds of time. There's what's called chronos, which is the ticking of the clock that moves on and on and on and on. You can't stop it. It just goes. And so you're always just in this constant movement of time, faster and faster, faster. Keep up with time. The other kind of time is what's called chaotic time, the right time. So the New Testament will talk about the fact that Jesus came at the kairos, the right time for that to happen. And so what I hear in chapter 3, which is, again, this isn't definitive, so don't take this as the answer. It's just how I hear it. What the author is saying is what we can do is get out of that chronos time of everything's moving. And yeah, if you follow that time, where it's all going to end is death. That's true no matter what. We're all heading that way and you can't stop it. But here he talks, I think, then about kairos this time. There is a right time for things to happen. And what you can do is embrace those right times as they come. So if, at birth, you seize the time to rejoice, to recognize this new birth, to embrace the reality of this with all your heart and not worry about what happened before or what is going to happen down the road, but to enter into that moment of time fully. Same thing with death. When death comes, you grieve, you gather together, you recognize the person, you recognize the reality of death, the pain that is, and you enter that moment. You don't grieve the fact that now we don't have the past anymore, or this person's not going to move into the future, but instead you recognize the reality of the moment that's there. And each of these is that sense of then, grab this time that you have. Don't worry. And in some ways, if you then compare it to what he says in the first part, all the things he says are vanity, are people who are trying to control things and hang on to them. All right, I got wealth. Well, if you want to hang on to that, it's silly. It's never going to, you're never going to hang on to that. You're never going to hang on to even wisdom's moving and changing. And, you can't grip it. You can't hold it. You can't wield it as if you're God. All these things are about this sense of wanting to control. But instead, the author said, to me again, the author is saying, you can just take the moments that come. You don't have to control that. Kind of, you said you read Buddhist stuff. Mindfulness is exactly this kind of thing in Buddhist thinking, which is you treasure the moment. You focus on the moment. I remember reading Thich Nhat Hanh, who talked about the fact that he was having lunch with this guy who was eating an orange and going over all the things he was going to do and everything. And he looked at him and said, "Did you even taste the orange? You were so busy planning about the future and what you were going to do and telling me this and telling me that, you didn't even taste it. You didn't even notice it." So his idea is you have to stop and take the moments, embrace the reality that's right in front of you, and not always be so caught up in the movement of the chronos type of time. That's always, so we have to always try to keep up with it. And even as he goes on then, God has made everything suitable for its time. For the time it's at, this is where you encounter God. So the best thing for people to do is then to be happy, enjoy yourself, take the time, grab it, grab your, even toil. You're right. Work can be meaningful. It can, even if it doesn't have long-term meaning, it can be meaningful for you. Yeah. You can find, some sense, even if it's not always happy, there's always some element that you can grab hold of, and focus on. What am I doing right now? Again, people who talk about mindfulness talk about, when you're doing the dishes, do the dishes. Don't be thinking about what you're going to do 5 minutes from now or what you did 10 minutes ago. Pay attention. Notice what you're doing. Notice the world in front of you. To me, that's what I hear in this particular piece, is that the author stops and says, all these things are happening all the time. But when they happen to you, pay attention.
I like that.
Look for God in this. All these things, if you have the belief over there, okay. If you have the belief of ancient Judaism that everything comes from God, then somehow God is present in everything that happens. That's the way you think about reality. Now, I think the author also sometimes struggles with that reality back and forth, but I think there's a moment here, and in some ways, I see chapter 3 as kind of the centerpiece of the book. This is the central concept around which the book spins, is this concept of each moment. The things that are, and I don't want to say it in the sense of God makes everything happen, but in each moment, this is the moment that's meant to be, whether God has stepped in and somehow changed some of that, or that we've created it that way, and God still comes to meet us in that moment. The moments are what the moments are. And you can bemoan that, you can throw a fit, you can whatever, or you can say, this is the moment I've got. I'm going to embrace it for the reality that it is. And now we get into that part I was talking about, and real quickly, we'll just look at this last section in chapter 3, and then we'll call it a day, where he talks more about, it's not the natural stuff that's so vexing. It's the social stuff that's so vexing for us as people. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, wickedness was there. And in the place of righteousness, wickedness was there as well. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for God has appointed a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to our human beings that God is testing them to show that they are but animals. For the fate of humans, fate of animals, it's the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath. Humans have no advantage over the animals, for all is vapor. All go to one place, all from the dust, all turn to dust again. Who knows whether the human spirit goes upward and the spirit of animals goes downward to the earth? So I saw there's nothing better than that. All should enjoy their work, for that's their lot. You can bring them to see what will be after them. So again, there's a certain amount of grimness, but there's also just, we don't know everything anyway.
Right.
We have to maybe train ourselves to just enjoy the moment.
Let go, let God.
Like what?
Let go, let God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking last night, I sat down with a cup of coffee and a couple of cookies, and I thought, and then I got out my phone, I thought, I should really be enjoying these cookies. Something simple like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Start
And-
training myself.
Mhm.
And isn't that all of us as humans? We get caught up in the concept, and again, to use those terms, chronos and kairos, most of us get caught up in chronos. The clock's ticking. I have to get this in. I have to do this. I have to do that. I'm behind on this. That's the way we live our lives day after day after day. And yeah, I think if we live our lives that way all the time, life will be vexing. Life will be annoying, because you can never catch up.
Oh.
You can never hang on.
When I was working, I was salaried, so it didn't make a difference. But there was no quitting time. And I would stay and try to get things done and try to get things done. And I'd go home and I would think all the stuff I didn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, one day, I'm just like, you know what? No matter how many hours I work, I'm never going to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so much relief from that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, tomorrow I'll do some more, but I'm never going to be done.
And pastors have to learn that really early
gosh,
in their
yes.
ministry, or they drive themselves crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
It's the same thing for nursing.
Yep.
The next shift comes on, but that this person and this and this and this and this and this and same thing with being a mother or a parent. There's always the next day, but time does have a certain importance. I mean, that's why there's a schedule for a bus, because the bus is going to come at that time. You can't just say, oh, I was in the moment, I missed the bus, or you missed your airplane ticket, or you missed the deadline for something.
Strangely enough, though, and I'm not, I think you're right. But that's also very cultural.
We created that.
Yep.
I think the secret is that we did create that.
And not all cultures think that way.
No, they don't.
When we went on our honeymoon to Jamaica, it was strange to go into places and say the train leaves about, and usually it was like 45 minutes late, and everything kind of ran on this. Time is not really as important as we think it is.
Standard time. Do you know what time Jewish Standard Time is? Always late.
Indigenous American culture is much less tied into the constant having to meet schedules and get to places by this time or that time. I mean, it's very cultural, European American sort of cultural, that we have this tight.
I was a nurse, and in the beginning of my career, we had time cards. And then they gave us just a timesheet to fill out for like 35 of my 40 years. And then the last 3 to 5 years, they made us punch a clock again, and the company was called Kronos. And I looked it up.
Where I work too.
Yep.
And then I had to do a physical letting go process, like, okay, I'm this, that, and the other thing in my career, but they don't trust me that I'm going to work. And now I have to punch a clock, and it has to be 6 minutes before and 6 minutes after, because some of us stayed after to get more work done. Couldn't get paid for it anymore. So it was all about the dollar. But it was finally, I just decided somewhere along the way, I had been in Al-Anon. They said, just consider your employer like a dysfunctional spouse. You didn't cause it, cure, or whatever. There's nothing you can do to control it. So I said, okay. But it was just like, really? But it was frustrating for me because it was like a lack of respect and trust. And
Yeah, and
You know?
you have to respect other people's time
Yeah.
too.
right.
It's a huge component, that I think sometimes we lose sight of that, is it's not just you. It's
No,
not just
right.
you.
No.
The dog needs to eat too. So
Yeah.
like 2 hours later, so the cycle of life, and I get that the sun comes up,
Yeah, it's really interesting now how,
It is interesting.
as I call it, CPA, bean counters have taken over a lot of businesses. Like health to me was WWJD, what would Jesus do? Halfway through my career, I was reading a book about Jesus healed without being paid. So I literally had a discussion with the CFO at our hospital at the time and saying, should we really charge for healthcare? Oh yeah. And I'm like, why? I really got her. I'm sorry. But I thought that was when, I was going through that period in my career, looking for some meaning in what I was doing. And so I always did go the extra mile with my patients because I treated them as I wanted to be treated down the line. And that's a personal decision. But that's just because of a lot of introspection and things in my life. But this resonates for me. So
It's kind of like just sometimes a reminder.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, your assignment till we meet again is just watch the world. See how
Yeah.
you define the movements of the world. And we'll pick up Quillith's thoughts when we get together.
This is good.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Enjoy it. Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
You too.